Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I echo your comments. I think I reject the sort of bizarre conflation of other really contentious issues that we're dealing with and the very thoughtful approach that this committee has taken to this question in our deliberations with one another, in our meetings with Mr. Lighthizer, and in the interaction between the members of this committee and this panel. It's unfortunate that those comments were somehow introduced into what I think has been a really civil conversation. I would also like to ask if I could submit for the record some testimony provided by a former member of this committee, Mr. Levin, who's been given some very good thought to this and has a document that he would like to have added to the record.
Without objection.
Thank you.
We miss him.
We do. We really do. I want to thank you all. This is a subject that is very important to the people that I represent. I come from Michigan, from East Central Michigan, and specifically my hometown of Flint, which has an incredible history in manufacturing. It was the birthplace of General Motors, and it was the place in 1937 when the first UAW contract was written after 44 days of a sit-down strike. So we helped build the middle class, and very sadly have felt the brunt of bad trade deals for a long time. So I come to this conversation very interested, not in just what the plain promises are in the agreement, but how these agreements are going to be enforced. So I'm very concerned that this is a subject that does need more attention. And we'd just like to pursue, this may be somewhat redundant with some of the past questions, but we'd like to pursue a bit, perhaps starting with Ms. Pulaski. So how does this new agreement's enforcement provision improve over what my community has experienced in the last couple of decades? Does it improve enforcement over what we've experienced? We heard those same promises before, by the way. We were told that this was going to be good for Mexican workers, the previous agreement. We were told that there would be robust enforcement, the previous agreement. We were told that it would not result in a net loss of jobs to Mexico, the previous agreement. And now we see Mexican workers making less than $2 an hour. Will this improve that situation substantially? Can I go home to my constituents and tell them that?
Congressman, I'm afraid that the enforcement mechanism of USMCA does absolutely nothing to improve enforcement of labor rights in Mexico or throughout the North American territory. So I don't think that you can reassure your constituents of that. And that's why I think we need a new and robust enforcement mechanism, not a little bit of tweaking with what's in there because it has not worked for 25 years. I think, therefore, we need to have a new mechanism. And I think given that good ideas have already been put forward, they can be expanded, developed, and improved. And I hope that today's hearing helps to launch that conversation more broadly because what we have now will not produce different results than what's happened over the last 25 years.
Thank you. Mr. Hernstadt, I wonder if you might comment. We were just lectured that we should have a vote tomorrow, I suppose, on this. What would happen to American workers if we simply ratified this agreement without any additional work? What would happen to American workers in manufacturing, for example?
It would be a dreadful waste of an opportunity to get this thing right. We would continue, as my colleague has just said, with the same outsourcing that's gone on for U.S. workers, with the same abuse of rights for Mexican workers. And by the way, I do take issue with some that say this NAFTA 2.0 represents the highest labor standards of any trade agreement because where we've been, that's not really much of a test. You could do very small things that have no effect on workers that are losing their jobs as we speak, as another plant moves to Mexico with respect to that.
Thank you. And I wonder if I could just finish asking Ms. Verwerk if you could comment. I'm happy to hear you comment that you're of the belief that increased enforcement would be helpful. Would you agree that it would make sense to reopen the agreement to include stronger enforcement language in the agreement?
I think what you're hearing is consensus among this panel that enforcement is important. And I also believe what you're hearing, Congressman Kildee, is that there's an opportunity to tweak some of the enforcement mechanisms in the agreement. And
so that would be, just to be clear, that would require additional negotiations and new language included in the agreement to strengthen enforcement. Is that correct?
I'm not going to claim to be the legislator or the negotiator. I think what's important to say exactly how it gets done. What I am pleased by is that we're having the conversation, and we would encourage a bipartisan approach to addressing these issues on enforcement. There's some good ideas that have been put forward today across all the panelists.
Thank you all. And I thank the panel very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.